All right, we are back with the Workplace Wanderer. I can say I'm a little bit proud of the commitment of doing this every single Wednesday that I possibly can where I'm not traveling. So it's cool to be back with another I guess episode is what we'll call this. This is available on LinkedIn as a LinkedIn Live for you guys to watch the video. Later on, the video will be uploaded to YouTube, but the audio is also uploaded to all of the different podcast platforms. I am very fortunate to have some support in the tech area that can help me make the most of these conversations, because I find that these conversations are extraordinarily important. I'm a firm believer in that we are all leaders in our own right, and we're all leaders in our own way, and we need to figure out the opportunities to be a leader in our life. So these conversations that we're having week after week allow us to explore different areas of leadership and different human experiences, and this is a great topic this week, and I'm so excited about this guest to help me understand human experience and the empowerment that comes along with the topic. I just love this. I'm so excited about this. So this week, my guest is Dr. Brandi Derr. I'm going to let you introduce yourself and your role at the college and everything else that you do as well. So thank you for coming on.
Oh my gosh, this is my pleasure. So I guess primarily I'm director of the Leadership PsyD program at William James College in Massachusetts. And additionally, I'm a founding member and senior consultant for Cosmos Consulting, which is a leadership development, consulting, change management practice that I have with my two lovely partners. And really, I can be found doing almost anything else. I really like to be involved with so many things. But those are the two main things I think I've been getting into these days.
You do come across as a person who wears a lot of hats. I think I can imagine that everybody who goes through the Leadership PsyD program and then goes on afterwards, or even stays as a professor there, like you have, and in charge of the actual program itself. I can imagine everyone has a bit of overachiever in them.
Yes. And really, I'm surrounded by overachieving geniuses who are more organized and do it much better than I do it. I just have the love of being involved in everything, but I proudly sort of wear my messy hat where I kind of fumble through with appreciation.
Well, I think you'll enjoy having me in the program, which we were just talking about. I start the program in August, and I think you'll enjoy having me because I will join you in the messiness.
Good.
I'm very good at just making things work and sticking things together and just going like, that looks good, let's keep going. Yes. And stretching myself a little bit thin.
Yes, absolutely.
So I kind of want to jump into the topic, and I think it's important to point out an elephant in the room of that, I think outside of some type of logical understanding as a white male, there is no way for me to fully understand and fully to be able to put my feet into the shoes of the experience of a Black female leader. There is just no way. And part of the reason I'm so excited about starting this program at William James is a lot of the emphasis that's placed on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, and I'm excited to learn about the experiences and develop empathy in those areas and begin to understand what it's like walking a day in someone else's shoes who have a totally different experience than mine.
Right. Oh, I love that. So, I'm a jump right in kind of person. I tend to kind of get like cocktail party vibes. So I guess I'd sort of start with, yes, I'm Black female, identified Black female leader, but my interest in Black female leadership specifically really came from research a few years back where I pulled a group of Black female professionals in a single organization together in a room for a focus group and realized that although they were in the same organization, they didn't know each other. They had no idea that they've been having parallel experiences as Black female leaders, and getting them in the room together really created this ongoing interest in how we connect these stories, how we help folks to feel like they can engage with a ready network and have that sort of collective efficacy instead of feeling like they're alone in their experiences. And so just to start with why this matters beyond me, beyond my personal interests, the sort of when we're talking about organizational worlds, when we're talking about leadership, we're often talking about a first white and then male centric system and structure.
Sure.
And so any Black female entering that space is already twice removed from that centralized structure, that centralized idea. And that sort of like double-edged sword for a Black woman is that they are both hyper visible, meaning I walk into a room, I am clearly Black, I'm clearly female. I look and stand out from most other people in the room when I'm among leaders. So I'm hyper visible in that way. So I am put on display. But in that same instance, I'm also invisible. So I yield the least amount of power by gender and by race. And so being hyper visible and invisible at the same time in this sort of white male centric structure means that I'm constantly needing to navigate all of the social mores. I have sort of this historic scripting in my head and in my heart from my family, from my ancestors about how I'm to engage the world. And that's before I've even begun to do the work that I'm here to do, right? So there are bridges to cross before I even get to point to zero, right? Where most other people in that space with me get to start from zero. They get to start even beyond zero. They start with an organization and a country and a world that embraces them for their potential, forgives their mistakes, sees them as close to the perfect ideal of a human being and of a leader. And so that's why so much of my work and so much of the work of William James College and Cosmos Consulting centers around how are we helping these emerging leaders who do not fit the central description of what a person in power looks like. So I guess that's how I would that's how I'd introduce the why.
No, it's a beautiful way to discuss it, and it's funny because my first question is why, and I'm hoping that you could share some of the insights on the topic. So I'm glad that that's really what you jumped into. So if I'm understanding and hearing you correctly, it's regardless of prior accomplishments, prior experiences, you feel like you're coming into a leadership role or into a role feeling like you have to prove yourself.
Oh, absolutely. Prove myself, but then also not be too present, right? Because then there are the stereotypes and the biases attached to being a Black woman that I'm constantly, and other Black female leaders are constantly needing to battle, right? So if I make a strong point in a meeting, am I making a strong point because I'm passionate and because I'm an expert in the field or because I have strong ideas? Or am I being seen as an angry Black woman, right? Where first people will see me as an aggressive presence and they won't hear my words and my messaging won't come across. Whereas my white counterpart could make the same point with the same inflection in their voice and be seen as a passionate leader and be heard and be taken in. So it's proving yourself while also trying to navigate spaces where I may not be welcomed to be my full, best, authentic self, and what that looks like.
It almost sounds as if you're constantly in a situation where it's impossible not to overthink every step you're taking.
Yes, we refer to it as mental Olympics. And it really, truly is that. It's a lifetime of training. It's constant conditioning. It is never sort of forgetting the toning that has been, sort of cultivated by all of our family members, our mentors, senior members who've come before us, who have sort of shown us the ropes. I talk about culturally matched mentorship for that reason, right? Because if I'm going to mentor someone and we are going to do this really intensive internal work, self-discovery, reflection, I first have to understand our connection and whether I understand their experience as a human being. And so I will often advocate for culturally matched mentorship for up and coming leaders of color, because if you're spending 30% of that precious time just trying to build the bridge before you can even get to the development, then I just feel like it's precious time wasted. Whereas when I step into the room with someone who I have some shared history with, some shared experience, we get to start from a place of immediate understanding and then bring that into the space of vulnerability and uncertainty and ambiguity and try to navigate what's happening. And that has to happen before you can even get to the place of leadership where you become the person impacting the environment and the culture and bringing an adaptive lens to any system that you're leading in.
And one of the questions I wrote down, which by the way, I don't typically write down questions prior to these things because I like to see where it flows. But to me, this is such an important topic that we all learn and understand and have the empathy and put ourselves in the shoes of other people and their experiences so we can understand and maybe slowly start to remove some of these biases that we have. But I guess that's coming from a beginner's mind, as you said. What are some steps that we can take to start to overcome some of these barriers that are almost seem inherent or that have been existed in society for so long and maybe are only just starting to get better? How do we work towards overcoming these?
Right. So, I was having this conversation the other day, and a coachee that I've been working with for about 8 or 9 months said something really beautiful. And I was like, wow, that's so true, that groups that are marginalized or oppressed, the way that it manifests is that there's less investment in those people. And so I think in organizations and teams, the first step is intentionally investing in the leadership development of Black women, seeing their unique perspectives, the strength that they bring just inherently with their amazing qualifications and their background and their education and all of that, and actually being intentional in your willingness and desire to build their leadership capacities. That doesn't happen currently. Currently, Black women enter spaces and they are navigating those spaces alone. If they don't have a mentor, if they don't have a ready coach, they are entering that space alone, and they are entering uncharted territories that are often volatile and aimed to oppress them. And so being intentional in your development means thinking with an identified emerging leader and thinking about what structures could best support them. Is it a mentor? Is it a coach? Is it engaging spaces where you recognize that there are 15% of your employee population is Black female? Do they know each other? Do they have spaces to engage? Because white men have spaces in their professional workplaces to engage with each other. They get to have ready, work buddies. They get to have people helping them climb the ladder, opening doors for them. And that just doesn't exist. The second is being intentional in representation. So I often walk into systems where they say, we're very diverse, 30% of our employee pool is, persons of color. And I'll say, okay, well, how many of them are in leadership roles where they have formal power and authority? Right. And often it's less than 5%. So if I'm coming into that system, I see my ceiling as the highest Black female person in front of me. And if the highest level Black female person in a system is a supervisor, I think to myself, The highest I can go is a supervisory level. I'll never be a director. I'll never be a vice president. I'll never be a C-suite leader because I don't see anyone else that looks like me in those spaces. So if that doesn't exist in the current organizational system, who can you be partnering them with in another part, a community partner where there is a leader, of color? How can you be showing them that, we believe what we see, right? Little boys, little white boys in America believe they can be president because when they look at the president, he is a white man. And with the exception of Obama, right? Like every president they've seen is a white man. And so for them, there's something that happens internally where they believe they can join the ranks. So how do we create more opportunities for Black female emerging leaders, by creating more visibility, by being intentional in the developing of their leadership capacities, and then in general, creating more inclusive practices for solving problems, for making decisions, so that the seats at the table where we invite stakeholders, where we invite members of our teams is genuine. It's, a real seat at the table where decisions are made and perspectives are shifted. You told me before we went live that you were coming into this knowing that you weren't necessarily the expert in this area. And so I told you to come in with beginner's mind. That was the phrase I used. Imagine an entire team of people entering spaces with beginner's mind every time they had to make a huge decision. It would mean everyone at the table brings their passion, their history, their unique worldview. And I guarantee you what would come out of that session would be so much more valuable than anything a sort of small centralized group could come up with. That's the dream.
Right. And I definitely see that, and people having sort of a blank canvas mind, of being willing to learn from each other and to be open to new ideas. And I'm trying to imagine some of the stumbling blocks that maybe certain leaders go through. And I'm wondering, do you think a lot of leaders in current organizations feel, what's the word I'm looking for? Do you feel like they're fearful of trying to implement certain changes, especially as, let's say, a white male leader? Do you find that they're afraid to make changes because even if it's a positive change, or they're creating a group where there's, let's say, Black female women are able to go and they have like sort of a supportive area and a place where they can go and be supportive to each other. It's a white male creating that. Do you feel like they're scared to make those decisions? Like they're seeing color, for example?
Right. Ooh, I love that question. It brings so many thoughts to my mind. And I am someone who just sort of rattles on. So please stop me.
No. I want you to.
All right. So firstly, so one person sort of creating a space for a group of people probably would be less ideal. It's better than nothing, but less ideal. So I tend to engage in shared leadership. So if someone's thinking that that space doesn't currently exist in their organization and they want to create that space, they should be calling on the thought partnership of people who represent that group to create that space with them. And then secondly, any sort of change is scary. That's why adaptive leadership is, it's one of the hardest types of leadership we engage, because when we have to adapt to a new way of being, we assume we will lose something, even if it's for a good thing, right? So if you get a promotion, that's a great thing. More money, more prestige, a higher title. But also there's a loss. Maybe there's a loss of time for your personal life. Maybe you won't be able to hang out with your work buddies because now you're their boss. So there are things you lose whenever you're engaging in significant change. So absolutely, it is scary. And for someone who has been born into privilege, the fear is about losing some form of power, right? Losing a sense of freedom, losing a sense of identity and culture, right? So The world feels safer when it looks like us, when it feels like us. And if I've existed in a white male-centric world as a white male, things feel comfortable for me. The world makes sense for me because the world has literally been shaped for me. So to take steps to engage other groups to come in and create a new understanding of how the world could be is probably equivalent to like moving out of the country or, becoming like an expat or something. So it's uncharted territory. It's scary. But if you can imagine the fear of a powerful, privileged white man, just take that lens and imagine what it feels like for a Black woman walking into a space where no one looks like her. And she's charged with a task of leading a group or being in charge of something in the midst of completely foreign territory where the world has actually been shaped to push her down. So, I'll say this as well, just because I'm thinking about like the white male perspective too. One of my primary business partners for Cosmos Consulting, his name is Dr. Dave Wiedemann. He is white Jewish male and an older gentleman. And so when we walk into spaces together, people will often defer to him because he looks like the central idea of a doctor, of a leader walking in. The reality is we're both walking into the space. We're both doctors. In our other world, I'm his boss, right? But that wouldn't readily be known. And so one of the things I lean on and why our partnership works is because there is complete authenticity and transparency. And the respect given is his investment in intentionally lifting me up as his partner and as a leader, as a fellow leader. So it's the little things. And I know this is going to sound so silly, but this matters to me. When we present together, we put a slide deck together, like a PowerPoint. He will intentionally put my name first. And when we have pictures of ourselves, he will put my picture first. And when he's introducing us, he will introduce himself, but then he will turn it over to me to introduce myself. And we include an inclusion statement in our bios, right? Where we identify all the things, all the intersectionality, that I'm Black, that I'm female, that I'm queer, that I'm Buddhist, right? And he will identify all of his intersectionality, that he's white, that he's male, that he's Jewish. And then we talk about how we are going to commit to creating spaces that are inclusive, and we will be imperfect at it, that people will tell us when they feel uncomfortable, and we will acknowledge that something we've done has impacted the space, and we will make amends. We will restore that relationship. We will restore that space. So he and I do it as partners, and then we create that space when we're walking into organizations or teams, especially now,
I think you made an important, tons of important points there. I think even towards the end of that about making mistakes, acknowledging mistakes and making amends is that I think people are very afraid, especially in a topic like this, to make mistakes. Absolutely. And that if you make a mistake once, you're out. Right. And the truth is that, like you said, if we can all go in with beginner's mind, that means that leaves room for error from each of us. Yeah. And that we're all allowed to make those mistakes. It's what we do with those mistakes after. And if we're willing to have enough humility to say, okay, I screwed up. How can I make a change? What would you like to see me do next time? What would be helpful moving forward?
The way that you framed that is really helpful too, right? Because you're going to, especially you, when you enter the program, you're going to keep hearing psychological safety. And people think it's just a thing that you say, like, all right, we are psychologically safe. Now everyone be vulnerable. The reality is leaders and systems, they help to encourage psychological safety by making space for people to be imperfect, to bring their authentic selves in, to assume good intention, and to make room for mistakes. That is what That's what fosters creativity. That's what adaptability is. It's really creativity. And people will be creative. They will bring new perspectives. They will try new things if they know they have the safety of being imperfect, making mistakes, having the support of the system behind them. And that same thing occurs in thinking about how to foster safe spaces for marginalized leaders, especially Black female leaders. The myth that there must be perfection in order to be accepted, that's so deeply set in the bones, right? That it takes a lot longer than just a quick meeting or a flashy, like, here's our value pasted, in the brochure of an organization.
Yeah.
Right? It is truly adaptive work. But
speaking of perfection, though, I can imagine, based on how we started this and the experience of kind of walking into a role feeling like you need to prove yourself, or that you kind of have some humps to overcome. I imagine that perfectionism is a giant trait in Black female leaders going into these roles, where feeling like they can't make a single mistake, or they're also going to be out and it's not going to work for them. So that goes back to the overthinking that we discussed prior.
Yeah, that's so true. And it sort of like operates in both worlds, right? So we have, I love this chart. I use this chart about sort of, it's called the white supremacy, characteristics of white supremacy, right? But it really should be called like characteristics of centralized cultural norms. And one of them is around perfectionism. And it has like a lot of other things underneath it, right? Quantity over quality, getting things out fast. So getting things out fast means not taking the time to hear other people's ideas. Worship of the written word, right? If you can be eloquent in your written word, it has more power than someone struggling to get their ideas out or express themselves. So there are all these little points where perfectionism, it's meant to exclude people, right? So if I'm in a room with 10 people and 3 of us are fluent English speaking American people, we will potentially have more floor space because we are the center of that space. Someone who maybe has a communication difference, maybe they need an interpreter because they're a part of the deaf community. They will have some space in the room, but because it's an inconvenience and it's different, they will have less floor space. Someone whose native language is not English, and is trying to get their ideas across, but may not have mastered how to kind of get those ideas out, they will also have less floor space. They'll be heard less.
But immediately written off.
They can be written off. And truly then it goes to our sort of how our brains make sense of the world. We're visual creatures. So people who look like us, our eyes will scan the room, and we will zero in on people who look like us. So if I'm in the room and I'm in a room of people who don't look like me, they'll notice me because I'm different, but they won't scan the room and sort of zero in on me when they're looking for feedback, when they're looking for input. So there are all these things working against us, like when we're in spaces. So it is about being intentional and saying, ooh, that person in neurodivergence, right? Like that's another thing. I talk a lot, so I'm always going to be heard in some way, but my counterparts might be more introverted, right? They're processing, they're thinking. If I'm a leader, I need to make space at the end of that discussion or during the discussion to say, there are a few people I haven't heard from as much. I'd love to hear what they have to say, because often they're processing differently. So there are all these differences operating in one space, right?
It's a lot to consider. There's a lot going on. You have to be very sensitive to surroundings and to everything. But I do think it comes back ultimately to what you talked about, is that psychological safety. If we want to create that at work, we must be sensitive to the differences, regardless of what they are. Right. We have to give space to those differences and give space to the different personality types. Race is everything that we need to focus on. We need to offer that space. And you said something earlier about that you said that it was something that we say. Psychological safety is something that we say.
Yeah.
Right? It's one of those things that we say. Like if we say it, all of a sudden everyone's going to be vulnerable. I've actually been referring to DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, as something that I think a lot of companies just say.
Yes.
And I think that they start with the idea of like, yes, like you said before, we're a diverse company, or that we have a great DEI initiative, and it's because they bring in people to do an hour-long presentation to help educate somebody, but no changes actually occur. So then to flip this all back onto what we were just talking about is a true DEI movement or initiative, does that involve then allowing room for that sensitivity and allowing room for the changes from person to person?
Right. I love everything you said, because we see it time and time again. It's so performative, right? Like it feels good to check a box and say we had someone come in and do a workshop with us. So that's where I think we talk about that imperfect space. Real healing and inclusion work, it is not nice and neat, and it doesn't feel like boxes being checked off. It feels like first surfacing what is happening in the system that you're in, right? Yeah. That's the hardest part. Everything from there sort of stems from it. And so like at Cosmos, if I walk into a system with my partner, Dr. Wiedemann or Dr. Young, we first start with focus grouping and interviewing. We want to know what's happening for people in the system. We don't take like one model and say, okay, now that's your DEI model. Go ahead, right. You're done now. So there is
individualized.
Yeah, there's a required sort of bespoke quality to the work where you have to first surface what's happening in the system, have the people in the system define what it would look like to feel safe and what's currently creating barriers, and then getting the buy-in from upper level leadership to engage work that might require them hearing things they don't want to hear about the system they lead, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the start of it. And then inviting those stakeholders from above, from below, from without to come and be a part of thinking about how that system can be more inclusive. That's so much more powerful than any ready-made sort of model or, template that someone can bring in. That's the power right there.
Right. So it can't just be it's a very personalized and individualized experience and process to each organization. And I tend to relate things back to my program of recovery. So I think you and I talked about this back when we were doing the interview process for school. But I'm somebody who's in long-term recovery from a substance use disorder, and I remember going through the early parts of the process, and I'm a member of a certain 12-step group that actually forces us to take a long, hard look at ourselves. And the first 3 steps are really about the acceptance of the problem, which can be the hardest part. That you'd think, actually, when you're there, you think it's the hardest part. And then the next part is understanding that there's a solution, that you can get through this. And then comes the inventory phase, where you're taking a long, hard, honest inventory of yourself and your behavior, your personality, everything that you've been doing that you've been pushing off and not wanting to face, that you've been using substances in some cases, or it could be gambling, it could be anything that we've been using to avoid recognizing that we have these certain flaws that are causing pain to others and to ourselves. And this is what it's reminding me of, is the hardest part of the recovery program that I went through was not recognizing I had a problem. That was easy. It was pretty obvious. It was the realizing how many mistakes and how flawed I am and how much work I had to do to grow. That was the scariest, most difficult, emotionally, physically challenging part for me to go through, and for many others. So I can understand what it's like as an organization to then have to take a good hard look at yourself and say, wow, I'm hurting others. The way my organization is running, whether I meant it or not, is affecting other people's lives and putting other people down or placing people in boxes, I need to make some changes. And this is going to be hard. But what I can tell you is that getting through that inventory phase and moving forward, after that comes the greatest growth you'll ever experience. So I can only imagine what leaders experience once they actually apply a true DEI initiative and truly start making some changes to their organization. I can only imagine a year later or longer, because I'm sure this is a long process, how beautiful the organization can look and how much pride you can have in the changes you've made.
Gosh, first of all, Blake, just thank you so much. Like, we talked about vulnerability just a few minutes ago. And I think even if you've spoken about your journey in this platform before, I think it still takes courage every single time to be vulnerable. And I do think I think you created a perfect parallel, right? Because the initial space, it requires a breaking down of things, a breaking down of assumptions, a breaking down of the identity you thought you had. And that is so true. It's the same thing is true in this adaptive, inclusive work. There's a breaking down, and breaking down makes you feel weak, right? Not this powerful, like, jump up to the mountaintop kind of thing that people make it out to be. It can make you feel weak and exhausted, and it surfaces all of the shadow stuff, right? That we work really hard to push down. But that part you talked about, when you talked about kind of going to the other side of that, your face changed, your face lit up just thinking about what it was like to be on that other side. And the same is true for any system where you've come out the other side, and it's not that you've solved and fixed everything. It's that you've come to realize in logic, in feeling, and in practice that you now know how to grow. You now know how to learn. You've learned to learn. You've learned to adapt. And that sense of relief is about knowing that no matter what comes about, no matter what challenges come, because they're going to come. The world we're not finite, right?
Sure.
You now know that you have the stuff to engage that and to kind of like allow yourself to be broken down in some way and rebuilt with a new understanding. So it's not therapy, but it is therapeutic, right? The process of this work is it's heavily steeped in like those therapeutic practices. So yeah, I think just that's a perfect parallel. Yeah.
Yeah, we could start a 12-step group called OA, Organizational Anonymous.
Yes, it's so true. I think we have a lot of unofficial chapters of that.
Yeah. It's funny, and this is totally not my saying at all, but a lot of people say that the 12-step model can apply to anything. You can kind of adapt it and apply it to anything. And it really is just a process of change and growth is really what the 12 steps have meant to be, to recognize where we're at, what do we need to change, an honest look, making amends for those issues, and then allowing that change to take place in your life.
Oh, yes.
And it's the same thing. I could see organizations going through it, but the key word that I think you used multiple times that I've used is process, is that this is not a light switch that you flip and go, okay, well, we brought in these people. Suddenly now we are an extraordinarily inclusive environment. It is a process of growing. And as people change and how people's comfortability changes and fully expressing who they are and themselves and expressing their needs, which is kind of been a beautiful shift that we've seen over the past few years, that people are much more apt to express their needs and where they're at as a human being. We have to recognize that we are going to constantly have to change with the times and change with the people who are coming to work, and realize that this is an ongoing process. But like you said, you're right. It gives a framework for growth and a framework to operate within so that we can maintain a certain level of inclusivity as organizations grow and move along.
I love that. You talked about the world changing, right? And that's the piece that, for the person I'm sitting in front of who is like, yeah, social justice, inclusion, but why does that matter to me? I'm in charge of keeping this company profitable. And I will say back to them, your profit lies in your ability to be more global in your thinking. The world is changing. Your organization will not succeed if it steeps itself in historical ideas that you are unwilling to flex to the changes of the world. The stagnancy in your thinking is going to be the lack, that's where you're going to see the lack of profit in your organization. So even if you don't have this sort of altruistic spirit and you are a businessman and you are thinking about your system in terms of, I need to keep the lights on. The world is ever changing. We just learned that. We just went through a pandemic where every single organization is now in some state of trauma. We are experiencing organizational PTSD. It has required us to be so adaptive and so flexible in our thinking that we've seen the companies that have failed because they have failed to expand their thinking, expand their perspectives. So if you don't have a diverse group of people at the table engaging in that creative, adaptive process, you're not setting yourself up with the best tools. If you were building a house, you wouldn't walk to the site with 20 hammers. What is that going to do? You need a diverse toolkit. You're building something from the ground up, you're rebuilding. You would want the most diverse tools. You would want 10 different ways to execute one thing just in case something doesn't work because of unforeseen circumstances.
Right.
So you would want that. So that would be my answer, right? To a leader who tells me, but why does this matter right now? My numbers are down. I need to focus on this. I would say, this is it.
Yeah, right. This is the answer. And I have so many questions about, and they're sort of like rhetorical questions because it's interesting to watch so many organizations they're living in this old school era of the way that they look at business, and they're not recognizing the power of the people who work for them and how much by investing in them, how much more success you're going to have as a company. It's sort of short-sighted versus long-sighted looking at the company, and they're not recognizing how important it is. And it's weird because there's so much data that exists that supports, like, the ROI is insane on investing in your employees, but people they look at that as like, that is the hard path. I do not want to do that. It takes too much time, too much effort. Let's just keep churning out some product and we'll just keep going. Like, I'm not worried about that stuff. And it's so short-sighted.
Yep.
It's fascinating. So I really quickly want to go to some of the comments. So Ashley Grimes is the president of NAMI Florida. I'm a board member for the local NAMI, which, by the way, we have an amazing Black female leader of the NAMI Broward, who I look up to so much. And I always appreciate her perspective and her strength and everything that she does. She is like such an inspiration to me in so many different ways. But we have Sarah and Amanda work with me. They're making some nice comments like, this is incredible. Love everything about this and positive energy. I do want to jump to a question that Ashley asked, which I certainly can't answer this question, but I'm sure you can. Do you feel that other women tend to be less supportive or more supportive of leaders that are women of color? Women are not always supportive of each other naturally.
Yes. So one thing it's so hard to explain to people because it seems counterintuitive, but the way that we have been raised in this culture, in this country, it sort of perpetuates internalized hate, right? So when I was a child, I went into the store and the dolls that I saw all had blonde hair and blue eyes and long flowing silky hair. So what did I learn about beauty? I learned that the closer I can get to that, the more beautiful I am. And the further away I am from that, the less beautiful I am. Mm-hmm. The same is true in every aspect of living. So what did I learn about being a leader? Even as a Black woman growing up, I learned that leaders are white and that they're male. And so when I see something that's different than that, even if I'm looking at someone who looks like me, I have so much internalized scripting that tells me that this will be a less effective leader. This leader will not be able to have the power to be a true advocate for me, because who are they going to access that power from? They don't have the ear of the white CEO, right? So yes, I've noticed that a lot of the explicit doubt has come from other women of color in my experience in previous leadership roles. It creates like a, it's emotionally the hardest, right? Because I'm looking at people and thinking, lift me up. Like we have shared history. But
that's what I was thinking. It's got to be the most. That's like has to be the most heartbreaking discrimination to feel, as if when it's coming from other women in the office.
Yeah.
It's got to feel so just discouraging.
But this system has created that. I am still working through that. I'm still working through my own imposter syndrome. It doesn't matter how many roles and how many letters I have after my name. I'm still engaging that internalized doubt that's sort of been set from day one. So that's why we need these mentorship spaces. We need these professional spaces to have this collective sense of identity for culturally matched leaders. I mean, we need those spaces for that exact reason. I love that question.
So, before I realized, I started talking about some of the questions I wrote down, and I didn't even get to the point I was making, was that 4 or 5 of the questions discuss the role of mentorship or allyship for this topic, because I can only imagine how important that is to have the support from, like you said, it just removes a layer of having to explain yourself, but it's from people that you understand and who can guide you through some of these challenges, but also support you when the system fails. The system fails you or challenges you in a way that you weren't expecting it to.
Yes,
go ahead.
It's a sense making, right? It's a mirror, it's a sounding board, it's all of those things to kind of help you to engage this sort of unknown system that you're in, for sure.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can only imagine how important it is. I know that for me, mentorship has been every step. Like, I feel like I have a mentor in every category of my life, and it's almost on accident. Like, I don't intentionally do that. I think I'm naturally just an inquisitive person. So I end up asking people so many questions that they're like, I'm just going to guide you through this because you're annoying the hell out of me. And they just start answering questions for me without me asking, which is always great. You touched on so many important points. And I think the one that I keep taking away is all of us needing to go in with every situation with that beginner's mind that you talked about. And I think that's where we can start to understand each other on a deeper level, and remember that although we are all different and we all come from different backgrounds, that we need to start to actually recognize that and to stop trying to ignore it because we're afraid. I think we need to actually acknowledge the differences in us and then use those differences to empower one another. And that's what I'm pulling from this conversation. And I think taking a good hard look at yourself and your system, if you are a leader, especially as a white male leader, I think it's time that we all take a very hard look at our system and our organization and say, okay, am I serving the people that are working with me? Am I actually being inclusive? Am I doing the right thing here? And I cannot be afraid to go and have these difficult and scary conversations because of the growth that it might lead to.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. You're going to write my book jacket.
Speaking of books, are there any resources or recommended reading or anything you would like to suggest?
I know. Oh, this is the 3rd podcast I've been in where someone's like, what's the book list?
Even YouTube videos, podcasts, is there anything?
Yeah. So give me some time. I know that you do this every Wednesday. I'm happy to just forward you resources that you can then give to folks listening. I'm so bad at this stuff.
If you want to chime in the comments later, you can always come back to this on my LinkedIn page, and you can just dump them there, because I think it is the middle of the day. I do recognize that, at least on the East Coast, and then it's early morning for most people. So most people are working. This tends to get more views as the day goes on and through the week or so. So feel free to just throw it in the comments for people to check out and see where it takes them.
Absolutely.
And, Reb, one of our friends who's over in Europe, said, hello, Blake. Hello, Dr. Derr. Thank you for this really interesting shares. I have to leave. Have a nice day. All right, see you later.
Oh, I love when people do that.
Well, Thank you so much. This is so inspiring. And honestly, I really can't wait to meet you in person. I'm hoping, I just can't wait to start this program and get rolling in this and to see where it takes me. This is every week having these conversations and focusing on this topic. I just get more and more excited, and work can feel, I can feel jaded sometimes about work. And this learning more and understanding how little I know about a topic is what excites me. And opportunities for growth. I can just see the next 5-6 years, however long it's going to take me to get through this. I can just see just year after year, just growing more, and how exciting it's going to be. So thank you for accepting me to your program.
Yes,
And
I'm so excited.
thank you for coming on here and shedding light on this really important topic.
Thank you for having me, Blake.
All right. And do you want to mention your companies real quick one more time?
So William James College is where Blake will be attending, where I'm director of the PsyD program, and Cosmos Consulting is our consulting practice. You can connect with me on LinkedIn to hear more about either one of those.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you. And thank you everybody who's watching.